The morning Dusthaven nearly burned to the ground was the same morning Elara Quinn dropped her last bottle of digitalis. She heard it shatter before she saw it, a clean crystalline crack against the warped floorboards of Mercer's apothecary, and then the smell of it, sharp and medicinal, rose up to meet her like a rebuke. She stood very still for a moment, her hand braced against the wooden counter, waiting for her heart to settle. That was the thing about her heart, it never quite kept pace with the rest of the world. It stuttered. It skipped. It reminded her with every irregular beat that she was living on borrowed time and borrowed luck, and that she ought not to drop things or run or be startled by the sound of her own pulse. Elara! Old Mr. Mercer appeared in the doorway of the back room, his spectacles pushed up on his forehead, his expression caught somewhere between concern and resignation. That the digitalis, I'll pay for it. She was already crouching carefully, gathering the larger shards, knowing full well that her wages for the next 2 weeks had just become glass and powder on the floor. I'm sorry, Mr. Mercer. I don't know what happened. You were reaching for the high shelf again? He crossed to her and gently took her arm, helping her stand. 63 years old and still more careful of her than anyone half his age. I've told you 100 times that's what the step stool is for. The step stool was in the back. The step stool is always in the back because you never bring it to the front. He surveyed the mess and sighed, the sound of a man who had long since made peace with minor catastrophes. Never mind, I'll order more on Thursday's supply wagon. In the meantime, you sit down and drink some water. I'm fine. You're pale as milk, and your lips are doing that thing. Elara pressed her fingers briefly to her mouth. Her lips did apparently turn faintly blue when her heart was being particularly stubborn about its rhythm. She had never been able to see it herself, but she had learned to trust other people's observations of her own face. I'm fine, she said again, with more conviction than she felt. The order came in from San Antonio. I need to sort it before noon. Sit down, Elara. She sat. The apothecary smelled of camphor and dried lavender, and the faint sweetness of laudanum kept behind the locked cabinet. It was a small shop, 2 rooms and a storeroom on the eastern edge of Dusthaven's main street, which was to say the only street that mattered. To the north, the livery and the feed store. To the south, the hotel and the saloon. And above all of it, visible from almost every point in town, the dark crest of Iron Ridge rising against the morning sky like the spine of some enormous buried creature. Iron Ridge Ranch, 200,000 acres of West Texas range, more cattle than most counties, and owned entirely by one man, Colt Maddox, who came to town perhaps 3 times a year and was the subject of more speculation than any man Elara had ever met. People said he was ruthless in business. People said he was cold in manner. People said he had loved a woman once, and she had carved out something vital when she left. People said a great many things about Colt Maddox that Elara did not particularly care about, because Colt Maddox existed in a different world than she did, a world of land deeds and cattle futures and decisions that moved markets. She existed in a world of cracked floorboards and shattered medicine bottles and the careful rationing of her own energy across a 12-hour workday. Drink the water, Mr. Mercer said, setting a tin cup beside her elbow, and she drank it. The supply wagon arrived an hour late, driven by a boy named Danny Pierce, who had the permanent expression of someone slightly alarmed by the pace of his own life. He handed over crates and packages with dutiful efficiency, and Elara recorded each item in the ledger with the careful, slightly cramped handwriting that had been her pride since she was 9 years old and learning from her grandmother at the kitchen table. Grandmother Quinn was the other thing Dusthaven held for her. Everything else, the low wages, the dusty street, the smallness of a life that sometimes felt like a coat 2 sizes too tight. She might have borne differently somewhere else, but her grandmother was 81, and her lungs were failing, and Elara was not going anywhere while there was breath in the old woman's body. She was still thinking about this, still adding up numbers in the ledger, with one part of her mind, while the other part performed its usual quiet inventory of worries, when the door of the apothecary opened and someone walked in who was not from Dusthaven. She knew it immediately, the way you know a hawk from a sparrow even before you see the wingspan, something in the quality of the movement, the way the figure filled the doorway before coming through it. She looked up. The man was tall. That was the first thing. The second thing was that he was not dressed for town trail dust on his coat boots that had seen real country, a hat pushed back on dark hair that was overdue for a barber. The third thing was his eyes, which were the color of creek water in shadow, and which were currently studying the interior of the apothecary with the calm, unhurried attention of a man accustomed to assessing things before he committed himself to them. He was, she realized after a moment of slightly stunned inventory, extraordinarily handsome. The kind of handsome that seemed almost accidental, as though it had happened without his cooperation. "Good morning," she said, because someone had to speak first. "Morning." His voice matched the rest of him, unhurried low with the flat Texas vowels of a man who had grown up on rangeland. "I need something for a cut. One of my men took a barbed wire fence to the arm this morning. It's not deep enough for stitching, but it needs cleaning and wrapping." "Do you have him with you?" "He's outside. He's the type that faints in enclosed spaces." A brief pause, the ghost of something that might in better lighting have been a wry expression. "He's a good cattle hand." "I'll come out," Elara said, already moving to gather what she needed. Carbolic solution, clean cloth, a roll of bandaging, the tin of antiseptic salve that Mr. Mercer made himself from a recipe of dubious origins, but documented efficacy. She assembled these items with the economical efficiency of someone who had done it many times, wrapped them in a cloth, and came around the counter. He stepped back to let her pass, and she was briefly inescapably aware of how tall he was. She came to his shoulder no more, and of the fact that he smelled of horses and leather and something clean underneath, like cold water. Outside in the raw morning light of the Dusthaven street, a man sat on a water trough with his sleeve rolled up in an expression of martyred stoicism on his weathered face. The cut was a good 4 inches long, running diagonally across his forearm, already darkening at the edges with the particular angry red of a wound that had been left too long. "This needs to be cleaned thoroughly," Elara said, kneeling beside him without ceremony. "It's going to sting." "Worse things have happened to me," the man said. "Yes," she agreed and began. She worked quietly and methodically the way she always did. The tall man stood a few feet away, not watching with the morbid fascination some people brought to the sight of someone else's wound, but simply present, leaning against the post of the apothecary's overhang, with his arms crossed, his eyes moving along the street in the habitual scan of a man who kept track of his surroundings as automatically as breathing. "You're not from here," she said when the cleaning was half done, and the man on the trough was breathing through his teeth with admirable composure. "Iron Ridge," the tall man said. She looked up then, met those creek shadow eyes across the few feet of morning air between them. "Maddox," she said. Something shifted in his expression, not surprise exactly, but a kind of recalibration, as though he was reassessing the inventory he had already done of her. "You know who I am. Everyone in Dusthaven knows who you are." She returned to the wound. "You just don't come down to town very often." "I come when I need to. And today you needed carbolic solution and bandaging." "Today," he said, "I needed several things." He paused. "What's your name?" "Elara Quinn." She pressed the bandaging into place with gentle, even pressure. "There," she said to the man on the trough. "Keep it clean. Change the dressing tomorrow morning and the day after. Come back if it swells or goes hot." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." She stood and found Colt Maddox's eyes still on her. "That'll be 40 cents, she said, "for the supplies. I'll pay inside." He held the door of the apothecary for her, and she walked through it, and that was how she met Colt Maddox for the first time over a barbed wire wound on a Tuesday morning in October, with dust on both their boots and the first cold wind of autumn coming down off the ridge. He came back 3 days later. She was stocking shelves when she heard the door had trained herself not to look up at every customer, because it interrupted the system she'd developed for organizing the inventory by type, and then by frequency of use. And so she did not see him until he was standing at the counter and Mr. Mercer was calling her name with the particular note of slightly flummoxed formality he reserved for important customers. "Miss Quinn." Mr. Mercer's eyebrows were elevated in a way that communicated volumes. "Mr. Maddox is asking for you specifically." She came to the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. Colt Maddox stood on the other side of it with a small cloth package in his hands, in an expression that was, she thought, making a considerable effort at neutrality. "My man's arm is healing well," he said without preamble. "I wanted to return this." He set the package on the counter. Inside she found were the remnants of the cloth and salve she had used carefully wrapped, and beneath them a small paper package of dried sage. "I didn't bring that," she said. "I know, my housekeeper sent it. She said you looked like a woman who needed something that smelled better than carbolic." Elara blinked. Then unexpectedly she laughed, a short, genuine sound surprised out of her before she could contain it. It was not the sort of thing she usually did in front of strangers. Certainly not in front of men who looked like they were accustomed to people composing themselves more carefully in their presence. But Colt Maddox did something unexpected in response to her laugh. He looked at her differently. The studied neutrality shifted very slightly into something she couldn't name, something that was adjacent to being caught off guard. "Tell her thank you," Elara said. "You can tell her yourself." He paused. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Quinn." "Oh." Iron Ridge employs 340 people. A ranch of that size generates a fair number of injuries in the ordinary course of operations: cuts, burns, broken fingers, the occasional more serious business. My nearest physician is in Abilene, which is a hard half-day's ride in good weather. What I need is someone with medical knowledge who can serve as a first response for the hands before something that should be minor becomes something serious. He folded his hands on the counter. They were large hands scarred in the particular way of a man who had not merely owned a working ranch, but had worked it himself. "I'm offering you 1 day a week at Iron Ridge. I'll pay 4 times your current hourly wage and provide transportation." Elara was quiet for a moment. 4 times her current wage was enough to notice. More than enough. "I have a job," she said. "I'm not asking you to leave it. 1 day a week, Saturdays if that works for Mercer." She glanced at Mr. Mercer, who was very deliberately reorganizing a display of cough remedies nearby and pretending not to listen. He gave her the smallest of nods. "Why me?" she asked. "You were competent," Colt Maddox said, as though competence was the obvious and sufficient explanation for everything. "And you didn't make a fuss about it." She thought about her grandmother's medicines, about the digitalis she had dropped and broken, about the particular arithmetic of a life lived too close to the edge of what it could afford. "All right," she said, "Saturdays." The first Saturday she rode out to Iron Ridge in the apothecary's small wagon, following the directions Maddox's man had delivered to the shop on Thursday. The road climbed out of the flat country round Dust Haven and into the broken terrain of the ridge itself, red rock and scrub cedar draws that cut deep into the earth, and everywhere the fence lines of Iron Ridge stretching to the horizon in every direction. The ranch house was not what she had expected. She had anticipated grandeur, the kind of architecture that advertised its own wealth as loudly as possible. What she found instead was a long, low structure of Texas limestone, functional and serious, built for the country rather than against it. The barns and outbuildings behind it were extensive. The corrals full of the quiet movement of horses, and over all of it hung the smell of wood smoke and hay, and the particular dry sweetness of cattle country in autumn. A woman met her at the wagon, compact, brown-skinned with iron-gray hair, and eyes that assessed her with cheerful efficiency. "Miss Quinn, I'm Rosa. I run this house." She said it with a matter-of-fact pride that Elara found immediately appealing. "Mr. Maddox is out on the north section until afternoon. He said to show you where you'll be working and introduce you to anybody who needs looking at." "That sounds sensible," Elara said. Rosa smiled. "I thought you'd say that. Come on then." The room they had set aside for her was a small space off the main bunkhouse, scrubbed clean with a table, a chair, good light from a north-facing window, and a set of shelves that were, she saw with surprise, the already stocked with supplies. Bandaging, carbolic, various salves. Not the full complement she would have chosen, but a serious and thoughtful beginning. "He ordered those from San Antonio," Rosa said, watching her inventory the shelves. "He sent a list he wrote himself." Elara turned. "He wrote the list himself." "Mr. Maddox reads," Rosa said with the mildly amused patience of a woman explaining something self-evident. "He reads everything. Don't let the boots fool you." By the time Colt Maddox rode in from the north section that afternoon, Elara had seen 4 of his men, a sprained wrist, an infected splinter, a man with a persistent cough she didn't like, and told him plainly he needed to see a real physician about, and a boy of about 16 who had gotten a cactus spine in an undignified location and was suffering the acute embarrassment of needing a woman's help to retrieve it. She handled all of them with the same quiet efficiency, and by the time the afternoon light began to turn gold and long across the ridge, she felt the particular tired satisfaction of work that had mattered. Maddox appeared in the doorway of her small room as she was packing her bag. He had cleaned up from the trail-washed, face-fresh shirt, and he stood in the doorway the way he had stood against the apothecary post arms, cross-taking stock. "How was it?" he said. "4 patients. One of them needs a physician, not me, the man with the cough. His name is Hector, and the rattling I'm hearing in his chest concerns me." She kept packing as she spoke, organized and brisk. The others are straightforward. I've noted everything in the ledger I left on the table. You made a ledger. I made a ledger. She snapped the bag closed. You should keep records of your workers' medical histories. It's useful. She looked up at him then and found that he was watching her with that same quality of attention he'd had in the apothecary, focused, unhurried, slightly unsettling. What? Nothing, he said. I'll have someone drive you back. I can manage the wagon myself. It'll be dark before you reach town. He uncrossed his arms. I'll drive you. She opened her mouth to argue, found she didn't have grounds for it that weren't purely reflexive, and closed it again. Fine, she said. They drove back to Dust Haven in the early dark, the sky above them going that deep clear blue that came after the sun was gone, but before the stars were fully out, and Colt Maddox was largely quiet, which she found she did not mind. She had spent enough of her life in the company of people who talked to fill silence because they were afraid of it. His silence had a different quality, comfortable, inhabited. Your grandmother lives with you, he asked when Dust Haven's lights appeared ahead of them. She glanced at him. How do you know about my grandmother? I asked someone. The matter-of-factness of it startled her slightly. Yes, she's lived with me for 3 years since her lungs began to go. She needs someone nearby. Is there other family? No. The word came out simple and complete the way it always did when she said it, not with sadness exactly, but with the particular flatness of a fact long since accepted. There's just the two of us. He was quiet for another few moments. Then the medicine you take, the bottle I saw you put away when you were treating Hector. She had not thought he'd notice that. She said nothing. Is it serious? He said. It's managed, she said carefully. That's not the same thing. No, she agreed. It's not. He didn't press it. She appreciated that more than she could reasonably explain. October turned to November, and November brought the cold down off the ridge in earnest. The kind of cold that had nothing soft in it, that came in on a northwest wind and stripped the last leaves off the cottonwoods along the creek and made the cattle move closer together in the night. Elara made her Saturday trips to Iron Ridge and began to know the place by its rhythms, the morning sorting, the afternoon quiet, the particular loud chaos of meal times in the bunkhouse that she heard through the thin wall of her workroom and found obscurely comforting. She came to know some of the men. Hector, who had followed her advice and ridden to Abilene and come back with medicine and a confirmed diagnosis of early consumption, and who looked at her with the specific gratitude of someone who knew they had been caught in time. Young Travis, the boy with the cactus spine, who was now 17 in his own estimation, and brought her coffee on Saturday mornings with elaborate casualness. Old Bo, the head wrangler, who had opinions about everything and delivered them with the cheerful authority of a man who had been right about most things for 60 years. And Rosa, who was a kind of gravitational center for the household, who knew where everything was, who was owed what favor by whom, what each man's particular weakness for comfort food was, and who had, in the 6 weeks of Elara's Saturdays, appointed herself Elara's particular advocate in the small politics of the ranch. He watches you, Rosa told her one afternoon in early November, with the directness that Elara had come to understand was simply Rosa's mode of communication. They were in the kitchen, and Rosa was making tortillas with the focused economy of long practice, and Elara was sitting at the kitchen table because she had been sent to rest by Rosa, who had noticed that her color was off. He watches everything, Elara said. It's how he manages 340 people. He watches things differently than he watches everything. Rosa pressed the tortilla flat with a smooth, practiced motion. He noticed when you changed the shelf arrangement in your room. He noticed when you started coming a half hour earlier. He noticed when your boots got new soles. Elara looked down at her boots. They were letting in water. I know. He had someone leave a pair of new ones at the supply room. You didn't notice they were there. Elara was very still for a moment. Those weren't. I know what belongs in the supply room and what doesn't. Rosa did not look up from her tortillas. He didn't say anything because he knew you'd refuse to accept them. The particular warmth that moved through Elara's chest at this information was something she deliberately did not examine. She had enough to manage without adding impossible things to the inventory. He doesn't do things like that, she said, which was not quite a statement of fact so much as a thing she was telling herself. He did this one, Rosa said. The document arrived on a Wednesday in the post from the county courthouse in Abilene, dressed to Elara Quinn, in handwriting she did not recognize. She opened it at the kitchen table of the small house she shared with her grandmother in the gray afternoon light of a November day while her grandmother slept in the next room. It was a legal document. She had seen enough of them land deeds contracts, the papers she had helped her grandmother organize over the years to recognize the form. But it took her 3 readings to understand what it actually said. A man named James Harlan Maddox had died intestate in Abilene in 1872. Among his effects, an attorney had found a record of a child born to a woman named Catherine Quinn, whom Maddox had kept company with during the years before his marriage. The child's name, according to the record, was Elara. The attorneys for the Maddox estate, prompted by a recently discovered codicil to James Maddox's later will, had been conducting a quiet inquiry for the past year. They believed they had found the child. James Harlan Maddox was Colt Maddox's father. Elara read the document 4 more times. She set it on the table. She looked at the window through which the November sky was doing its flat gray business without any particular awareness of the thing that had just happened in the kitchen below it. If the document was accurate, if James Maddox was truly her father, then she and Colt Maddox shared blood. The same blood. Half-siblings separated by wealth and circumstance, and a secret their parents had kept for 27 years. She sat at the table for a long time until the sky outside went from gray to dark, and her grandmother called her name from the bedroom. And she folded the document with careful hands and put it away in the tin box where she kept things that mattered. She did not know what to do with it yet. She only knew that it had changed something: the shape of the world, the particular geography of her Saturdays, the quality of whatever it was she had been trying not to feel about Colt Maddox. Everything, she thought. It had changed everything. She did not go to Iron Ridge the following Saturday. She sent word with Danny Pierce's supply wagon, a brief note apologetically professional. Personal matter will resume next week, and then she sat in the apothecary through the long Saturday morning and tried to think clearly. The document could be wrong. Legal documents were sometimes wrong. Records misattributed, names confused inquiries that followed the wrong thread of circumstance to the wrong conclusion. She knew almost nothing about her father. Her mother had died when Elara was 4, and her grandmother, who had raised her, spoke of her mother's history only in the most careful terms. A young woman, unwise choices a man who was already committed elsewhere. That was the story as Elara had always understood it. A man who was already committed elsewhere. A man she had never had a name for. Now she had a name, and the name was the problem. She was making herself eat lunch methodically because she knew she needed to, because her heart did not appreciate it when she forgot meals. When the door of the apothecary opened and Colt Maddox walked in. He was not in trail clothes this time. He wore town clothes, dark coat, clean shirt, hat in his hand, and the look on his face was not his usual careful neutral. It was something closer to concern, which was unusual enough on those particular features to be immediately alarming. "You didn't come," he said. "I sent word." "I know, I'm not here about the work." He came to stand at the counter, and he looked at her with those creek shadow eyes, and she had the sudden, irrational conviction that he could see the document in the tin box in her kitchen. That he somehow already knew. "Are you unwell?" "I'm fine." "You're a terrible liar, Miss Quinn." The bluntness of it startled her into silence. "Your color is wrong," he said, "and you're sitting like someone who's been holding something heavy for several days and is getting tired of it." He set his hat on the counter. "What happened?" She looked at him, across the counter in the quiet of the apothecary with the smell of camphor in the air and the sound of dust-haven street outside the window. She thought about what Rosa had said, about boots left in the supply room and a man who noticed when she came half an hour early. "I received a document," she said carefully, "from an attorney in Abilene." Something shifted in his expression. It was subtle, but she had spent enough weeks learning to read a face that worked hard not to show anything, and she saw it: a slight sharpening, a stillness. "About," he said, "about a man named James Harlan Maddox." She held his gaze. "And about me." The silence in the apothecary stretched out long and complicated. Outside, a horse went by at a trot. Somewhere further down the street, a door banged in the wind. "My father," Colt Maddox said finally. His voice was utterly level. She could not read anything in it. "According to the document, yes." She pressed her hands flat on the counter, steadying herself. "The attorneys believe I am his daughter, from a woman named Catherine Quinn in the years before his marriage." She paused. "Before your mother." More silence. He looked at her for a long time and she looked back and she was aware distantly, with the part of her mind that always kept its own counsel of how strange it was to be standing here across a counter from this man watching the recalculation happen behind his eyes. I need to see the document, he said. I know, no. And I need to speak to some people. He picked up his hat. His hands were steady, but she noticed that his jaw had tightened. I'll come back on Thursday. All right, she said. He left. She stood very still for a moment, listening to the silence he'd left behind, and then she took her medicine because she had forgotten the morning dose, and her heart was reminding her of this fact with increasing irritability. If it was true, she told herself, then she would deal with it. She had dealt with worse. She had dealt with a heart that tried to kill her from the inside, with poverty, with aloneness, with a world that did not generally make room for women like her. She would deal with this too. But she stood at the counter for a long time after he left her hands still flat on the wood, feeling the particular weight of something she had only just realized she wanted slipping away before she had ever had a chance to reach for it. Colt Maddox came back on Thursday as he said he would. He came alone without the usual accompaniment of ranch hands or the quiet efficiency of a man conducting business. He came as simply himself, which Elara was beginning to understand was not a thing he did often or easily. He had, she suspected, spent a long time constructing the version of himself that the world saw composed, capable, impenetrable, and simplicity was not part of that construction. She met him at the door of the apothecary, and they walked together to the small house 3 streets over that she shared with her grandmother, because this was not a conversation to have over a counter in a public shop. Her grandmother was awake, propped on pillows in the back room, her lungs working with the careful effort that had become the background rhythm of the house. Elara had told her nothing yet. She would tell her after. The kitchen was warm. She had kept the stove going, and she set the tin box on the table between them and opened it and took out the document. Colt Maddox read it. He read it the way she had noticed him read things, completely thoroughly, not rushing. When he finished, he set it down and looked at his hands for a moment. The attorney's name is Gerald Finch, he said. In Abilene. Yes. I know who Gerald Finch is. He turned the document over, studying the back, as though expecting additional information there. He handled the settlement of my father's estate. He would have had access to records. Does that mean you think it's accurate? He was quiet for a moment. I think it could be accurate, he said finally. My father was a man who had a wide life before my mother. She knew about some of it. Not, I suspect, all of it. He looked up at her. What do you know about your mother's history? Elara had spent the past week pulling at the threads of that question. Very little, she said honestly. My grandmother raised me from the age of 4 when my mother died. She told me my father was a man who couldn't stay. That's the phrase she always used. A man who couldn't stay. She never gave me a name. I thought it was because there was nothing to give, or because she was protecting me. Did you ask her directly? I didn't know there was a name to ask about. She looked at the document. I still don't know if there is. This could be wrong. Yes. He touched the edge of the paper, a brief, considering gesture. It could be wrong. He looked at her, and there was something in his expression she hadn't seen before, something that was almost, she thought, vulnerable in the specific way of a man who was very rarely that and was finding it uncomfortable. If it's correct, you would be my half-sister. The word landed between them on the table. Half-sister. She had been saying it to herself all week, practicing it, trying to make it fit. It didn't fit. Things that were true didn't always fit, though. That was not a reliable measure. Yes, she said, which would make you a Maddox by blood, if not by name. His voice was careful, but she heard something underneath it, some complicated emotion she couldn't fully read. And would make you entitled to. I don't want anything from the estate, she said quickly. That's not why I'm telling you. I'm telling you because it seemed like something you should know. Because continuing to work for you under the circumstances seemed, she searched for the word, dishonest. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't parse at all. Then he said, you were going to stop coming. I thought I should. Because of this. Yes. He was quiet. He looked at the document again, and then at his hands, and then at her, that recalibrating gaze she had come to recognize. I'd like you to keep coming, he said, until we know more, until we find out if this document is what it says it is, or something else entirely. Something else, she said. I have enemies, Miss Quinn. A man with 200,000 acres in West Texas accumulates enemies the way other men accumulate debts. People who want pieces of what I've built. People who would benefit from disruption. He pushed the document back toward her with a steady hand. I'm not saying that's what this is. I'm saying it should be verified before either of us adjusts our lives on its account. Elara picked up the document and put it back in the tin box. She was thinking about what he'd said enemies and about the way the document had arrived with no warning, addressed in a handwriting she didn't recognize from an attorney she'd never had any contact with. She was thinking about what a thing like this, if planted deliberately, might be intended to do. But she was also thinking, what if it's simply true? What if it's just true the way hard things are sometimes simply true? All right, she said, I'll keep coming. For now. He nodded and stood and picked up his hat from where he'd set it on the table, and she walked him to the door of the house. The evening was cold, a clear cold, with stars beginning in the east, and she stood in the doorway and watched him walk down the street toward the livery where his horse was hitched. He was halfway down the block when he stopped and turned. The boots, he said. She waited. I left them in the supply room. You were going to need them before winter set in. He held her gaze across the dark street. It was practical. Yes, she said. Thank you. He turned and walked on, and she closed the door and stood in her kitchen for a long time after with the stove warm at her back and her tin box on the table and her heart doing its uneven, complicated work in her chest. He sent a man to Abilene to look into Gerald Finch and the provenance of the document. A quiet man, competent-looking, who came to the apothecary to inform her of this mission with the brisk efficiency of someone delivering routine correspondence. Elara nodded, thanked him, and went back to her inventory. 2 weeks passed. November deepened into the kind of cold that cracked the mud of the street overnight and made the horses blow steam in the morning. Elara continued her Saturdays at Iron Ridge, and Colt Maddox continued to be professional and considerate and largely unknowable, except for the small things she was learning to read in him, the way she'd learned to read the sky before weather changed. He was not sleeping well. She knew this because his eyes had a particular quality in the morning, not tired exactly, but carrying something. She knew because Rosa told her with Rosa's characteristic directness that he was up before 4 most nights, and that she found coffee cups left in places that indicated long hours of solitary thinking. She did not ask him about it. She went about her work, and he went about his, and there was a particular quality to the space between them that was neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, something taut and quiet and careful, like a line under load. On the second Saturday of December, he came to find her mid-morning when she was between patients and sitting at the small table in her room writing notes in the ledger she maintained. He knocked at the door frame she had noticed that he always knocked, which she suspected some people found surprising in a man who owned everything within visible distance, and leaned in the doorway. I had a letter from my man in Abilene, he said. She set down her pen. And Gerald Finch is a legitimate attorney. He has handled several Maddox estate matters. The record he referenced, the one about your mother and my father, he says it is real. He found it in a box of papers from my father's personal effects. Colt came fully into the room and sat in the chair across from her table. She noticed he was choosing to sit, which was different from his usual standing in doorways. There's a letter, apparently, in my father's hand. He mentions Catherine Quinn by name. He mentions a child. The silence was different from other silences. It had weight. So it's true, Elara said. It appears to be. He looked at her with a directness that she had come to appreciate for its honesty, even when it was delivering something difficult. You are my father's daughter. She nodded slowly. The shock of it had worn off over the past 2 weeks, replaced by a kind of dull comprehension. The way a body learns to work around an injury that isn't going to heal, incorporating it into the ordinary motion of things. What does that mean legally? The codicil in his later will mentions any undiscovered natural children. It's vague. I suspect he wrote it without real expectation of it being relevant. My lawyer is reviewing it. He paused. But I want to be clear, regardless of what the legal situation turns out to be, your position at Iron Ridge is not affected. You're not employed out of charity, and you're not being kept there for any complicated reason. You are the best qualified person I could find for the work you do, and the men need you. She looked at him for a moment. You're trying to separate the two things. Yes. The professional and the personal. Yes. That might not be possible, she said honestly. No, he agreed, it might not. He looked at his hands and then at her. I had a sister once. She died young. I was 8. He said it simply without apparent sentiment, but she heard the simplicity itself as the sentiment, the particular quietness of an old grief that had been carried so long, it no longer announced itself. I don't know what to do with this, he said. I want you to know that. I don't know what this is or what it means for either of us, and I'm not going to pretend I do. It was, she thought, the most honest thing she had ever heard him say. I don't know either, she said. He nodded. He stood. At the door, he paused. Rosa has made pozole. She makes it when she thinks people need it. Will you eat with us at the house tonight before you go? She thought about saying no. She thought about the clean lines and the professional distances and all the good reasons to keep things as they were. All right, she said. She ate pozole with Colt Maddox and Rosa at the long kitchen table of the Iron Ridge house, and it was the first time she had been in the main house rather than the workroom or the outbuildings. It was furnished with the same functional seriousness as the exterior, good wood solid construction. Nothing decorative that wasn't also useful. There were books everywhere which did not surprise her. There were no portraits on the walls which she noticed, but did not ask about. Rosa ate with them as a matter of course, and her presence made the meal easier. Rosa had the social gift of making people comfortable by simply never noticing when they were uncomfortable, which was a form of grace Elara recognized and appreciated. They talked about this ranch mostly, about the winter preparations, the cattle count, the state of the fencing on the north section. She learned that Colt had taken Iron Ridge from a reasonable operation to something extraordinary in the 12 years since his father died, that he had done it by making decisions that other people thought were wrong and being right about them often enough to matter. She learned that he was in the process of negotiating water rights that would change the ranch's capacity significantly, and that the negotiation was being contested by interests she did not know. She did not learn about his wife. She knew in the general way that Dusthaven knew things, that there had been a wife, Vera Maddox, married 6 years ago, gone 3 years ago, no children. The how and why of it, a subject of considerable speculation that she had never particularly engaged with. But neither Rosa nor Colt mentioned her, and Elara did not ask. After dinner and the coal walk from the house to where her wagon was hitched, Colt paused at the fence post and looked at the sky, which was doing something magnificent the way the Texas sky sometimes did in winter, going so deep a black that the stars had a three-dimensional quality, as though you were looking into something rather than at something. You grew up here, he said. In this country. In Dusthaven? Yes. What's it like to be from a place like this with... He stopped. She knew what he was stopping before. With a heart that doesn't work right, she said without making it softer. With a body that objects to the work of being alive. Yes. She considered it honestly. You learn to read yourself, she said. You learn which kinds of tired are fine and which kinds are warnings. You learn to do everything a little more carefully than other people, not because you're afraid, but because you have to. She looked at the stars. And you learn eventually that being careful isn't the same as being small. I've had more life in me than my body was supposed to permit. I've just had to be deliberate about it. He was quiet for a moment. That's an extraordinary way to think about it. It's the only way I've found that works. She turned to her wagon. Good night, Mr. Maddox. Colt, he said. She paused her hand on the wagon side. If we're to be... He seemed to feel the strangeness of the word before he said it. Family. You ought to call me Colt. She got into the wagon. She gathered the reins. Good night, she said, and she was almost certain she heard something in his exhale behind her. Not quite a laugh, but its immediate neighbor. She drove back to Dusthaven under the winter stars, and she tried to think about nothing in particular, and she mostly succeeded. The man who came to see her on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks later was not the quiet man Colt had sent to Abilene. He was different, sharper dressed, with the particular polished look of a man who was presenting himself as something that required a certain amount of effort to maintain. He said his name was Warren Dale, and he said he was an attorney. I represent certain interests concerned with the Maddox estate, he said, sitting across from her in the apothecary's back room where she had offered him a chair because it seemed impolite not to. Interests that have been monitoring the recent developments regarding Mr. Maddox's natural heir. I'm not, she started. You are Miss Quinn, or maybe depending on how the legal proceedings develop. He set a folder on the table between them. The reason for my visit is to make you aware of certain information that may affect your position in those proceedings. She looked at the folder but did not open it. What kind of information? Information regarding the authenticity of the original document sent to you, the record discovered in James Maddox's papers. He folded his hands. We have reason to believe that document was not entirely as it appeared. She was very still. Meaning? Meaning, Miss Quinn, that the record of your mother and James Maddox was real, but that it was, how shall I put this, selectively presented. Certain other records were suppressed, records that would indicate the document sent to you was only part of a larger picture, and that the conclusion it leads to that you are James Maddox's natural child may not be accurate. She looked at him for a long moment. He had the smooth assurance of a man who said things like this regularly and was accustomed to people receiving them with alarm. She was not alarmed. She was instead paying very close attention. Who sent you, she said. As I said, I represent. I know what you said. I'm asking who sent you. A pause. He recalibrated his expression slightly. My client prefers to remain unnamed at this stage. Then I'm not sure I have anything further to discuss with you. She stood. I appreciate you coming. If your client has information relevant to the legal proceedings, I'd suggest providing it through the appropriate channels. Miss Quinn, he stood as well. My client is prepared to offer you a settlement, regardless of the legal outcome, a sum that would be significantly useful to a woman in your circumstances. She looked at him across the small table in the back room of Mercer's apothecary with the smell of camphor in the air and the sound of Dust Haven going about its business outside. She thought about the tin box in her kitchen. She thought about her grandmother in the next room breathing carefully. She thought about a man who knocked before entering rooms that were technically his. Good day, Mr. Dale, she said. He left. She stood at the window and watched him walk to a horse that was too good for Dust Haven and ride south, which was not toward Abilene. She wrote a letter to Colt Maddox that afternoon. She sealed it and gave it to Travis when he came to pick up supplies for Iron Ridge. And she wrote urgent on the outside in her careful, cramped handwriting, because that was what it was. The response came the next morning. Before she had properly opened the shop, he would be in Dust Haven by noon. He arrived at 11 with the look of a man who had ridden hard and was managing the evidence of this with some effort. She told him about Warren Dale over coffee at the kitchen table, the same table she noted where they had first read the document together while her grandmother slept, and he listened with the focused, unreadable attention that meant he was hearing everything, including the things she wasn't saying. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Warren Dale, he said, works for a man named Silas Corder. Who is Silas Corder? A land speculator. His voice was even, but she heard something underneath it, something cold. He has been attempting to acquire parcels of land adjacent to Iron Ridge for the past 2 years. He has been unsuccessful because the people who own those parcels don't want to sell, and because my water rights negotiations, if they succeed, will make those parcels significantly more valuable to me, which is an argument for the sellers to hold. He looked at her. A legal challenge to the ownership of Iron Ridge, suggesting that there is a natural heir whose claims have not been properly settled, would tie the water rights negotiation in knots for years. Elara understood. And if I were to appear to be a claimant, or if I were to accept a settlement offer that acknowledged my status as a potential heir, it would give Corder grounds to challenge the proceedings. Yes. So the document may have been surfaced deliberately. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his expression intent. The record itself may be real, I believe it is. I've seen my father's letter with my own eyes, but the timing of its discovery, the manner of its presentation to you, that is what interests me. She thought about this. Then the question isn't whether I'm your half-sister. The question is, who arranged for me to find out now and why? Yes. And if I refuse Dale's offer, Corder will try something else. He sat back. He has a great deal at stake in this. His eyes met hers. So do you, Miss Quinn. I want you to understand that. You are not in this because of anything you chose. You were put here. I know, she said. I'm not pleased about it. Something that was almost a smile moved across his face and was gone. No, he said. I didn't imagine you would be. He stayed for an hour and they planned what they would do next, and she was aware, with the precise clarity her heart occasionally granted her, when it was behaving of sitting across a kitchen table from a man who was treating her like a partner in something that mattered, and of how rare a thing that was, and of how completely she could not afford to let herself want it to be anything more than that. Winter settled over the ridge country with the serious, heavy intention of a season that had waited long enough. The creek at the edge of Iron Ridge froze over in January. The cattle moved with the ponderous patience of creatures that had made peace with cold, and the sky above Dust Haven went the color of a pewter dish for weeks at a time. Elara's grandmother was worse. It happened gradually, and then all at once, the way these things always did, the slow diminishment that you told yourself was not significant, and then the morning you woke and could see plainly that it was. Her grandmother's lungs had been failing for 3 years, but January brought a cold that settled into the old woman's chest with an occupying intent. And by the end of the month, Elara was spending her evenings listening to breathing that was not quite right, counting breaths, the way she had learned to count her own heartbeats, and running the quiet arithmetic of how long. She told Colt. She was not sure when it had become natural to tell him things, but it had. There was a particular quality to his attention, the way he listened without filling the space with reassurances he couldn't make, that made it feel safe to say the true thing rather than the managed version. "If you need to stay in town," he said when she came on a Saturday in late January, and told him her grandmother had been bad in the night, "stay. The men can manage. The men are going to manage with or without my help. My grandmother needs someone to sit with her, and she refuses to let me sit idle. She insists I keep working." She smiled slightly. "She has opinions about usefulness. She sounds like someone I'd like to meet." "She would take you apart," Elara said, gently but thoroughly. She paused. "She doesn't have long. There are things I should ask her. About my mother, about who my father was." "You haven't asked her yet." "I didn't know what to ask before." "I do now." He looked at her with that steady, unhurried attention. "Do you want someone to go with you?" "No," she said. "This one I need to do alone." She asked her grandmother on a Sunday evening in early February, when the light was going gold through the bedroom window, and her grandmother was having a better day. The particular luminous better day that sometimes came in the late stages like a lamp turned up before it went out. She sat on the edge of the bed and took the old woman's hand and said, "Grandma, I need to know about my father, his real name." Her grandmother was quiet for a long time, long enough that Elara thought she might not answer. Then she said, her voice, the thin, careful voice that her lungs permitted, "Where did you find it?" "A legal document, a letter from a man named James Maddox." Another silence. Her grandmother's hand was small and dry in hers, the skin loose over the bones. "James," she said. "Yes, James Maddox." She closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them, they had a different quality. Not grief exactly, but the look of someone setting down a weight they have carried too long. "Your mother loved him. He was married, but your mother loved him, and he was kind to her even though he couldn't stay." "Then he is my father." "He is your mother's—" Her grandmother paused. Then something shifted in her face, something that was not a question, but was the answer to a question Elara had not quite asked. "Elara," her voice changed. "Elara James Maddox was your mother's love, but he is not your father." Elara went very still. "Your mother was sick," her grandmother said. "When you were born, she was very sick, and you were small, too small. They thought you might not. There was another baby born the same night, a baby whose mother died in the delivery." She paused to breathe the careful breath of someone managing a limited resource. "The physician was a young man. He made a choice. He put you with the other baby's father, a man named Thomas Quinn, who had nothing because he thought you would not survive, and he put the other baby with your mother because he thought she deserved to have something to hold on to while she could." The silence in the room was the silence of a very large thing. "There was a mistake," her grandmother said. "And then your mother died, and Thomas Quinn left, and I took you home. And I knew you were not Catherine's blood, but you were mine by then. You were mine." "Grandma." Elara's voice was barely a sound. "Forgive an old woman," her grandmother whispered. "I was afraid of losing you. You were the only thing left." Elara sat with this for a long time, her grandmother's hand in hers warm and small, the gold light moving across the floor. She was not Catherine Quinn's daughter. She was not James Maddox's daughter. She was not Colt Maddox's half-sister. She was not any of the things the document had said she was. She told Colt the next Saturday. She told him all of it, what her grandmother had said, the switched babies, the young physicians, a terrible, compassionate error. All of it, and she watched his face while she told him, and what she saw there was complicated and careful, and underneath everything, something she recognized as relief. She recognized it because she felt it herself, and she was ashamed of that, and she was going to have to think about what it meant. He was quiet for a long moment after she finished. Then the document, Quarters people surfaced, he said finally, was real but irrelevant. The record of your mother and my father was real, but it doesn't make you my sister. No, because you're not Catherine Quinn's biological daughter. No. He looked at his hands, then at her. Are you all right? It was such a simple question. The kind of question that could be answered quickly and managed and filed away. She chose not to do that. I don't know who I am, she said honestly. I've always known my family, my grandmother, my mother, though she died when I was 4, the Quinns of Dusthaven. And now I know I'm not. I don't know what I am biologically. I don't know who my actual parents were. She paused. And I know that my grandmother carried that for 30 years. She did it out of love. I know. She pressed her hands together. I know, that's not the hard part. The hard part is... She stopped. He waited. The hard part, she said quietly, is that for 3 months I was certain of the hardest possible reason why I could not allow myself to feel what I... She stopped again. Her heart was doing its uneven work, and she breathed through it. This is inappropriate, she said. Probably, he agreed. He was looking at her with something direct and honest that she had never seen in him before. No careful management, no professional distance. Just the unguarded face of a man sitting across from something he was also struggling to navigate. But then most things that matter are. The silence between them was different from other silences. It was not comfortable or uncomfortable. It was, she thought, the silence of two people looking at the same thing from opposite sides and discovering they can both see it. I'm still your employee, she said. Yes. And you still don't know what this is? No. He said it without apology. I've spent 3 years not knowing what anything was, being wrong about people I thought I knew completely. A pause, and she understood he meant his wife without his having to name her. I'm not capable of certainty right now. That's honest, she said. I'm trying. She picked up her bag. I'll go see about Travis, she said. He was wrestling a steer yesterday and I want to check his shoulder. Elara. He said her name, her first name for the first time in 3 months of Saturdays, and it stopped her at the door. She turned. I'm glad, he said simply, that it turned out to be wrong. She looked at him for a moment. So am I, she said, and left. The woman arrived in Dusthaven on the first Thursday of March. Elara did not know who she was at first. She came into the apothecary in the way certain women came into rooms, not loudly, but with the expectation of being seen, which had the same effect. She was beautiful in the particular way that had been carefully maintained. Dark hair dressed with expensive simplicity, clothes that were from somewhere other than Texas, a face that was composed with the practiced grace of a woman who had learned very young that a composed face was armor. Miss Quinn, she said. She looked at Elara with assessment that was subtle but thorough. Yes. My name is Vera Maddox. Elara was quiet for the space of 2 heartbeats. Then Mrs. Maddox. Formerly, Vera Maddox said. The word was precise chosen. I've been in Fort Worth. I've only recently heard about the situation with my ex-husband and the Maddox estate matter. She set her gloves on the counter, kid leather, pale gray. I thought it appropriate to introduce myself. Why? Elara said, because it seemed like the honest question. Something flicked behind Vera Maddox's eyes, surprise quickly managed. Because events at Iron Ridge affect me, she said. I retained certain interests. My divorce settlement was incomplete in several respects. I'm not an attorney, Elara said, and the estate matter you're referring to has been substantially resolved. I have no claim on the Maddox estate. She met Vera Maddox's eyes steadily. Whatever brought you here specifically to find me, I don't think I'm the person you actually need to speak to. A pause, then Vera Maddox did something unexpected. She smiled, and the smile had a quality that was almost, Elara thought, wry, as though she was reassessing something. He said you were direct, she said. Who did? Several people in this town. She picked up her gloves. You should know, Miss Quinn, that I am with child. 3 months along, and the child is Colt's. She said it clearly without drama, watching Elara's face. I intend to inform him when I'm ready. In the meantime, I think it would benefit everyone to understand the landscape before things become public. Elara said nothing. He'll feel obligated, Vera Maddox continued. He is whatever else a man with a sense of duty. A child changes the calculation of everything. She tilted her head slightly. I thought you should know. Then she left, taking her kid gloves and her composed face with her, and the apothecary was very quiet. Elara stood at the counter for a moment, her hands flat on the wood the way she always held on to solid things when her heart was doing too much. She thought about what Vera Maddox had just done and what she was expecting in response. She thought about the particular deliberateness with which Vera Maddox had chosen to come to her first before Colt. And she thought, that is not a woman telling a rival to stand down. That is a woman taking a measurement. She wrote another letter to Colt that afternoon. This one she marked confidential as well as urgent because it was both, and she gave it to a boy with a fast horse rather than waiting for Travis. The reply came before the next morning. I know, don't do anything yet, trust me. She sat with those 4 words for a while. They were not, she thought, the words of a man who had been ambushed by news. They were the words of a man who already knew. He came to Dust Haven 2 days later on a Saturday, not her regular Saturday, but an extra one arrived before she opened the shop. She found him sitting on the step of the apothecary in the early light, his hat in his hands, which was unusual enough that she stopped walking when she saw him. You knew about her, she said from 10 feet away, because she had been thinking about this for 2 days and she needed to say it before anything else. He looked up at her. I knew she was in the territory. I've had someone keeping track of her movements for 6 months. He stood. Not because I'm still invested in anything regarding her, because the last time I failed to keep track of her, she cost me significantly. The divorce was bad. The divorce was straightforward. What happened before the divorce was not. He gestured toward the door. Can we go inside? Inside in the back room with the camphor smell and the early quiet of a Saturday before Dust Haven properly woke, she sat across from him, and he told her what he had not told anyone except Rosa and his lawyer, that his wife had in the final year of their marriage been conducting a systematic removal of records and financial instruments that she believed would secure her position in a divorce, that she had in several instances made representations to other parties about the state of Iron Ridge's finances that were not accurate, and that the child she was now claiming to carry, if she was indeed pregnant, was not his. You know that for certain, Elara said. We hadn't been together, he said simply, in over a year before the divorce was final. The child, if there is one, is 3 months. The timing is impossible. She absorbed this. She's using it. Yes. For what? She wants a renegotiation of the settlement. She's been talking to land interests, potentially including Quarters people, about Iron Ridge's vulnerabilities. A paternity claim, even a false one, creates legal complications, particularly at a moment when the water rights negotiation is at a critical stage. He looked at her steadily. She came to you first because she wanted to see how you'd react, whether you'd interfere, whether I had told you anything. She was taking a measurement, Elara said. He looked at her with something that was not quite surprise but was close. Yes. What did she find out? That's what I'd like to know. Elara thought about it. She thought about the way Vera Maddox had smiled at the end, that wry, almost assessing smile. I think she found out that I'm not what she expected, she said. I don't know if that helps you or not. It helps me, he said, to know that you can read people. I've been reading people in a small town all my life. It's either that or be surprised constantly. She folded her hands on the table. What are you going to do? My lawyer is filing a response to the preliminary claim. I have records that establish the timeline clearly. He paused. But this will be public. Within a few weeks, the whole county will know she's made this claim and that I'm contesting it, and all of it will be... He stopped, looked at her with an expression she recognized as a man looking at something he is not quite ready to say. I don't want you caught in it. Your reputation, your work. My reputation, she said, is as the apothecary's assistant with a bad heart who makes house calls and grows her own lavender. It is not the sort of reputation that shatters easily. She met his eyes. Do what you need to do. He looked at her for a long moment. You are Tiwa, he said slowly, as though choosing each word, the most remarkably unfrightened person I have ever met. I'm frightened constantly, she said. I've just learned to work while I'm doing it. Something shifted in his face, something that was not his careful neutral, not his professional assessment, but something quieter and more private. He looked at her across the table the way the sky sometimes looked before weather, when the atmosphere was changing and you could feel it before it arrived. He did not say anything. He didn't need to. She felt it anyway, that change in the atmosphere, and she held it in her chest carefully the way she held all the things that mattered. "I'll see you Saturday," she said. "The regular one." "Yes," he said, and then quietly, "Thank you, Elara." She walked him to the door of the apothecary in the early morning light, and she watched him go, and her heart, her complicated, imperfect, borrowed time heart, was doing something it did not often do. It was beating steadily. March came in like something with intentions. The wind down off the ridge carrying the smell of wet earth and new grass, and the particular charged quality of country that was waking up after too long a sleep. The cattle moved differently in spring, less the patient endurance of winter, and more the restless seeking of animals who remembered what open range felt like. Elara noticed this on her Saturdays, the way the whole landscape seemed to be becoming itself again. She noticed other things too. The way the mornings at Iron Ridge had a different quality now, not the careful professional distance of the early months, but something easier. Something that had grown between them in the incremental way of things that happen, whether or not you are paying attention. She knew which coffee cup was his because it was always on the left side of the stove. She knew the 3-beat knock he used on her workroom door. She knew when he was thinking hard about something by the way he stood at fences very still, his weight, even his gaze going out to the middle distance where he could see far enough. She had told herself with great discipline that she was not going to think about what she felt. That discipline was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. The water rights negotiation was moving toward resolution. The other party, a ranching combine 3 counties over, had finally agreed to the terms that Colt's lawyers had been pressing for, and the signing was to happen in Abilene on the first Friday of April. It was, Rosa told her privately, the most important business event of the past decade at Iron Ridge. It secured the ranch's future for the next generation. Whose next generation? Elara asked with what she hoped was the tone of a woman asking a purely practical question. Rosa looked at her with the patience of a woman who had watched the same thing happening for months and was waiting for the participants to catch up with the audience. "Someone's," she said. The paternity claim had gone through its preliminary legal proceedings with the quiet efficiency of a well-prepared legal team. Colt's lawyers had filed their response supported by medical records and the sworn testimony of 2 physicians, one in Fort Worth, one in Dallas, who had seen Vera Maddox in the relevant period and could speak to the timeline in clinical terms. The claim was in the language of the law, unsupportable. What the claim did, however, before it became officially unsupportable was make noise. It made the particular noise that untrue things made when they were said loudly enough in public places, a noise that attached itself to the names involved and was slow to dissipate even after the fact was established. Elara heard it in Dust Haven, the questions at the counter of the apothecary, the way certain people looked at her when she walked in on Saturdays, the general murmuring interest of a small town that had found itself adjacent to something dramatic. She managed it the way she managed everything, by being exactly who she was consistently, without adjustment for an audience. On a Wednesday in early April, a week before the Abilene signing, Warrendale came back to Dust Haven. She saw him from the window of the apothecary before he came in, recognized the Too Good horse, the city careful clothes. She was ready for him when he appeared in the doorway. "Miss Quinn." He had the same polished presentation, slightly worn around the edges this time, like a performance running later in its run than the opening. "I was hoping to speak with you." "I was hoping you wouldn't come back," she said pleasantly. "But here we are." He came to the counter anyway. He had a different quality this time, less the smooth certainty of a man delivering a prepared message, and more the manner of someone improvising, which meant the situation had changed in ways that had not gone as planned. "The legal proceedings," he said. "Yes. My client is aware that they are not proceeding as hoped." He cleared his throat. "He is prepared to offer a more substantial settlement, not to you directly, to you, separately from any legal claim. A sum that would cover your grandmother's care medical expenses for yourself and a comfortable—" "Mr. Dale." She set down the inventory she had been holding. "I want you to listen to me carefully because I have a feeling we won't be having this conversation again, and I'd like to say this once." She looked at him directly. "I am a woman who has lived her whole life without the things your client is offering. I have managed a heart condition, supported a sick grandmother, and worked for wages that most people would find insufficient. And I have been happier in my actual life than Silas Corder has been in his purchased one, I suspect. A sum of money does not change what I know and what I've seen. What you've seen, he said. I've seen a man spend months protecting something real. I've seen what integrity looks like when it isn't doing it for an audience. She picked up the inventory again. I've also seen what Silas Corder's kind of business looks like, and it looks exactly like this: a man in good clothes offering money to the person least likely to be impressed by it. Dale was quiet for a moment. Then he said unexpectedly, "He thought you'd say that." Corder. No. He looked almost uncomfortable. She did. Mrs. Maddox. Elara went still. They've been working together, Dale said with the air of a man who has decided that this particular ship is sinking and he would prefer to be on record as having said something honest before it went under. Corder and Mrs. Maddox. The paternity claim was his idea. She provided the action. The document about you and the estate was hers. She found the record in Corder's research files where Corder's people had already identified it, and she arranged for it to be sent to you. The intention was to destabilize the water rights negotiation by introducing multiple legal complications simultaneously. He straightened his jacket slightly. I'm an attorney, Miss Quinn. I was told I was working a legitimate settlement case. I was not told about all of this. A pause. I thought you should know. The silence in the apothecary had a peculiar quality. Why are you telling me this? She said. Because I don't think it's going to end cleanly, he said. And I would rather not be the only person who didn't do anything about it before it didn't. He left. She stood at the counter and thought, and then she went to write another letter to Colt. The letter reached Iron Ridge at mid-afternoon, and by the time the sun was touching the ridgeline, Colt was at the apothecary in trail-dusted clothes that said he had not stopped to change. She gave him the full account, Dale the disclosure about Vera, and Corder's the scope of what had apparently been a coordinated campaign. She told it straight without editorializing because this was the kind of thing that needed to be received clearly. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How long have you known about the connection between them?" "I've suspected since you told me about Vera's settlement interest. That she came to me first before you in the way she did it was odd. If she simply wanted to notify you of a pregnancy, she'd have gone to you. She came to me because she was trying to evaluate something, and the only thing worth evaluating was what I knew and what my relationship to the situation was." She paused. If she and Corder were coordinating, she'd want to know if I was going to be a complication. Were you? Apparently, I was not the kind she expected. She met his eyes. Dale said she predicted I'd refuse the money. She's not wrong about everything. He stood at the window looking at the Dusthaven street in the last light, and she watched his profile. The jaw set the tension in his shoulders that she knew meant he was working through something. The signing in Abilene is next week. If this is accurate, that they intended to create simultaneous legal complications, the timing was designed around that. Yes. Which means they'll try something else before Friday. Yes. He turned from the window. In the fading light, she could see the particular tired quality in his face. Not physical tiredness, but the tiredness of a man who has been managing threats for a long time and is wearing it. It was the thing she had thought in the early months might be coldness. Now she knew it was something older and more complicated: vigilance that had been maintained past the point where it was sustainable. "I'll have my lawyer file what Dale told you," he said. "It changes the legal picture significantly. If Corder's people tampered with evidence," they did. Dale implied it directly. "Then the estate matter and the paternity claim both collapse." He looked at her. "Are you all right? You've been in the middle of this for months." "I'm a little tired," she admitted, which was more than she usually admitted. "It's been a long winter." He crossed the room, and she was aware of how small the back room of the apothecary was. 3 steps was all it took, and then he was close enough that she could see the detail of his face in the last light, the weathering of it, the particular gravity around his eyes. He was not touching her. He was simply near. "After Friday," he said, "when this is done, I want to talk to you." "About what?" He looked at her for a moment with that unguarded expression she had first seen at her kitchen table when she had told him about the switch babies, and he had been relieved, and she had recognized his relief because she shared it. "About the thing we've been not talking about," he said, "for months." Her heart was doing something irregular and inconvenient. That's a long list, she said. I know. The ghost of something moved across his face. I'll narrow it down. The fire started on a Thursday night, 3 days before the signing. Elara was at Iron Ridge. She had come the day before at Colt's request to deal with a run of illnesses in the bunkhouse that had taken out 6 men and left the ranch short-handed. She had her own room for overnight stays, now a proper room in the house, simply furnished with a good lamp and a window that looked east. She had been in it for 2 months, using it perhaps once or twice each month, and there were she had noticed small things that had appeared without comment. A quilt that Rosa had made a small shelf for her medical bag, a lavender plant on the windowsill that had no practical function except to be there. She woke to the sound of shouting at midnight. Her body knew before her mind did, was already moving, already pulling on clothes, because shouting at midnight in a ranch house did not have benign explanations. By the time she was at the window, she could see it, the orange light from the direction of the south barn, which was where the winter hay was stored, and which was, she calculated, in the first cold clear moment of waking, catastrophically close to the corrals. She was in the hallway when Colt came out of his room fully dressed. She suspected he had not been sleeping. He looked at her face and then passed her to the window at the end of the hall, where the orange light was painting the glass. South barn, she said. Rosa. He was already moving, his voice carrying the particular authority of a man who had been in charge of emergencies before. Get everyone out of the house. Elara. I know what to do, she said. They went together through the dark house, and outside the cold air hit her like water. The south barn was not fully involved yet, but moving toward it, the fire running along the dry hay with the confident speed of a thing that knew it was going to win. The corrals were full of horses that were beginning to understand what was near them, and expressing this with the particular anguished eloquence of frightened animals. The next hour was chaos with purpose. The men who were able, those not leveled by illness, formed a bucket line from the water trough. Others were pulling the horses from the nearest corral, the work loud and dangerous in the way of frightened animals in dark spaces. Elara was triaging. This man needed a wet cloth over his face that one had burned his hand, pulling the barn door at the hour. Boy Travis was coughing from smoke, and she pulled him back and made him sit at the fence. Colt was everywhere. She tracked him by his voice in the smoke, and dark, steady directing. Never panicked, the voice of someone who had made himself the fixed point for other people to navigate by. She saw him twice clearly, once at the barn door bracing it so 2 men could drag a hay cart out, once at the corral fence helping pull a horse that had its lead rope wrapped wrong and was fighting in earnest. The fire was contained before the barn was fully lost. The south wall was gone and the roof of one section, but the horses were out and the main structure was standing, and the bucket line had done its work. By 3 in the morning, what remained was a smoking ruin that was not actively dangerous, and men sitting on the ground catching their breath, and the particular sick relief of something that could have been much worse. She was treating a man's Burns careful work by lantern light, the man stoic in the particular Texan way, when she heard Rosa say her name sharply. She looked up. Travis was standing 6 feet away, his expression carrying the message before he found the words. He went back in, he said. Someone said there were 2 more horses in the back. She was moving before he finished the sentence. She did not think about it. This was the thing she had learned about herself in a crisis. Her body moved and her mind caught up after. And the heart condition that limited her in ordinary circumstances was simply a fact to be accounted for the way she accounted for everything. She went around the burning south wall toward the back of the barn where the smoke was thickest, and she pulled her collar over her mouth and she went in. He was there, and 2 horses were there, and he had them both by their halters, and he was moving toward the door she had come through. Elara. His voice was rough with smoke, but the expression on his face when he saw her, that was the thing she carried afterward, that expression, the combination of relief and a kind of terrified frustration that she realized meant he was afraid. Not for himself. What are you saying? The door's clearer this way, she said. Come on. They got the horses out. They came out of the burning barn into the cold night air, and she put her hands on her knitting and breathed. And her heart was doing something alarming, the rapid stuttering that meant she had asked too much of it, and she was aware of this with the detached precision she reserved for her own body in extremis. She was aware of Colt turning, dropping the halter ropes, crossing to her in 2 strides. His hands on her arms, the particular solidity of that. Elara. His voice was different, not the voice he used to direct emergencies. I'm all right, she said. My heart is complaining. It does this. I just need a moment. Sit down. I'm fine standing. Sit. He said it with the particular authority of a man who is not angry, but is also not negotiating. And she sat on the fence rail, and he crouched in front of her with his face level with hers and his hands still on her arms, his eyes going over her face with a focused attention that had nothing professional in it at all. I'm fine, she said again. Her heart was beginning to settle the way it always did when she gave it room. You went into a burning building. You went into a burning building. I knew where the exits were. So did I. She met his eyes. You would have done the same for any of your people. You've been doing it all night. She paused. I've been doing it all night too. He looked at her for a moment. The fire was a low orange in the background and the smoke was still in the air, and she was sitting on a fence rail at 3 in the morning with charcoal on her face and her heart working its way back to its version of normal. And he was crouched in front of her with his hands on her arms and his eyes saying something his voice had not yet caught up to. You could have, he started. Yes, she said. I could have, I didn't, neither did you. A pause, then he said very quietly, I was afraid. I know, not of the fire. She looked at him. Don't do that again, he said. And then before she could answer, he stood and pulled her up from the fence rail and held onto her both arms, her face against his neck, and she felt the particular solidity of it warm and real and steady, and her heart, her complicated, imperfect, borrowed time heartbeat as steadily as it had ever beaten in her life. She put her hands against his back. I won't promise that, she said into his shoulder. I know, he said, and he did not let go. The fire's origin investigated in the morning light was not accidental. The point of origin was in the back corner of the south barn where the hay was stored, and the evidence of an accelerant lamp oil carefully placed was visible to anyone who looked with the right eyes. Colt's men looked. His foreman made a formal report. Quarters man, a worker who had been hired 6 weeks ago with letters of reference that turned out on investigation to have been generated by the same network that had produced Warrendale, was found in Abilene 3 days later. He had taken a horse and a head start, but not enough of either. The water rights signing happened on Friday as scheduled. Colt rode to Abilene with his lawyer and his foreman and came back that evening with the signed document, which he set on the kitchen table at Iron Ridge and looked at for a moment with the expression of a man who has finished something difficult. Elara was there. She had stayed at Iron Ridge for the week managing the continuing fallout of the bunkhouse illness and the fire aftermath, and she was at the kitchen table with Rosa when he came home. Rosa looked at the document and said, good, and went back to her cooking. Elara looked at it and said nothing, because there was not anything to say that wasn't too large for the moment. Colt sat down across from her. He looked tired in the deep, real way of exhaustion after sustained effort, not the wearing down of a single long day, but the release of tension that had been maintained for months. He looked, she thought, very nearly peaceful. Corder is going to be dealing with fraud allegations for the next 2 years, he said. His consortium is pulling back. Dale filed a disclosure with the court this morning. He looked at her. It's done. Yes. The barn can be rebuilt. He was quiet for a moment. My lawyer thinks the estate challenge will be formally dismissed within the month. The paternity claim is already withdrawn. Another pause. Vera is in Fort Worth. She won't bother you again. Elara nodded. He looked at her across the table. Rosa was at the stove, conspicuously occupied with something that required great attention. The kitchen was warm and smelled of coffee and wood smoke and the particular clean smell of a house that was lived in properly. I said I wanted to talk to you, he said, after Friday. You did. I'm not good at this, he said. The directness of it, the lack of preamble, was very like him. I was married to someone who taught me that honesty was a vulnerability, that wanting things openly was how you lost them. He folded his hands on the table. I'm trying to unlearn that. She waited. You are the most honest person I have ever known, he said. You are honest about what you know, what you don't know, what you can do, what you can't. You told me your heart was a problem before I had any reason to deserve that confidence. You told me about the document when you could have stayed quiet. Every time you have had reason to protect yourself by saying less, you have said more. He met her eyes. I don't know how to be with someone like that. I'm not sure I'm capable of it yet, but I know that I want. He stopped. I know that the thought of you not being here is something I cannot account for anymore. in the calculations I make. About the ranch, about the future, about Colt. She said his name to stop the careful inventory because he was cataloging the thing rather than saying it, which was a way of managing it. You can say it plainly. He looked at her, and then he said simply and plainly, I love you. I don't know what to do with it yet, and I'm going to make mistakes, and I'm asking you to be patient with me while I figure out how to be worth it. The kitchen was very quiet except for Rosa, who was doing something at the stove that involved a great deal of focused, oblivious stirring. You already are, Elara said. He reached across the table. His hand, large and scarred, covered hers. She turned her hand over and held on. Saturdays aren't enough, he said. No, she agreed. They're not. April came to the Ridge country in its proper fashion, with the smell of rain on caliche soil and the particular green of new grass on the slopes that you only got in that narrow window between the last cold and the first real heat. The cattle moved through it with unhurried appreciation. The creek ran high and clear with snowmelt from the Cap Rock country, and the horses in the Iron Ridge corrals lifted their heads to the morning wind like they were reading something good. Elara moved her things from the Dust Haven house to Iron Ridge at the end of April. She was not sentimental about possessions, had learned early that sentimentality was a luxury that came with storage space she didn't have, but she was careful about her books and her grandmother's things. The tin box. The lavender plant from the windowsill that had, against all botanical expectations, survived the winter. Her medical supplies, which took up the most space. Her grandmother had died in the second week of April in her sleep on a morning that had a particular quality of light that Elara chose to think of as a grace. She had been present. She had been holding the old woman's hand. It was the best death that the circumstances allowed, and Elara was grieving it with the straightforward, undecorated attention she brought to difficult things. Colt had come to the funeral. He had stood at the back of the small church in Dust Haven in his good dark coat, and afterward he had shaken no one's hand and said nothing to Elara except, I'm sorry. 2 words, and in them all the particular weight of a man who knew what loss was and did not try to make it smaller. Rosa had sent a meal delivered by Travis with the careful reverence of a boy who was not sure of the protocols for grief, but wanted to get them right. The meal was pozole because Rosa sent pozole when she thought people needed it, and it was the best meal Elara had eaten all week. She was still grieving when she moved. She brought the grief with her to Iron Ridge, the way she brought everything clearly labeled, properly stored, not ignored. The room she was given was not the overnight room which had been provisional. It was larger at the east end of the house, with windows on 2 sides and a view that was on clear mornings 30 miles to the east and south. Rosa had put the quilt on the bed and arranged the lavender plant on the east windowsill and said nothing about any of it except, the lamp in the corner needs a new wick. I'll get it. Elara stood in the room with her boxes and looked at the view. 30 miles in 2 directions, red rock and the new green of April grass, and the long fence lines of Iron Ridge running to the horizon. The sky above it going that particular Texas blue that was almost violent in its clarity. Her grandmother had lived her whole life in a town that could be crossed in 10 minutes. Elara had lived her whole life in the radius that her heart permitted. And now she was standing in a room that looked out on 30 miles of country, and she realized with a quality of surprise that was also a quality of recognition, arriving somewhere she had not known she was going. She unpacked her books first, then her tin box, then her lavender plant on the windowsill where Rosa had put it. She continued her work. This was not a negotiation. She had been clear about it, and Colt had been clear that he understood it. She was not the ranch owner's companion in a decorative sense. She was the person who managed the medical health of 340 working people, and she did it with the same focused competence she had brought to every Saturday for 7 months, now expanded across the full week. There was, she found, a great deal more work than one day allowed. Hector, whose consumption had been caught early and was responding to treatment, needed monitoring. The bunkhouse population fluctuated seasonally, with spring bringing new hands, and new hands brought new histories and new ailments. She organized a system of records, a proper ledger for each worker maintained alphabetically updated with each contact, and she trained young Travis to keep the supply inventory, which he did with a zealous attention that she suspected had as much to do with the importance of the responsibility as with any natural inclination toward record keeping. In the evening, she was at the house. This was the new country, the domestic geography of a shared life, which she was learning the way she learned everything by paying careful attention and not pretending to know things she didn't. Colt was a man who worked long days and came in for supper with his mind still partly on whatever problem the day had generated and who needed. She learned approximately 20 minutes of quiet before he was fully present at the table. This was not coldness. It was the decompression of a man who had carried a great deal for a long time and had not always had somewhere safe to set it down. She gave him the 20 minutes, after which he was consistently the most present person she had ever shared a meal with, an attentive, curious, willing to ask questions and willing to answer them, with the particular qualities she had first noticed at her kitchen table when he had said, "I don't know what to do with this," and meant it as the truth rather than a management of her expectations. He told her about this ranch. She told him about the patients. They argued sometimes about practical things. She thought the bunkhouse water supply needed improving. He thought the expense was premature, and they went through 3 evenings of this disagreement in a way that was fundamentally satisfying because they were both trying to be right rather than to win. She was right. He acknowledged this and authorized the improvement, and the manner in which he did so directly without qualifications made her love him more, which she had not thought was possible. She had not said that to him yet. She was waiting for the right moment, which she acknowledged to herself was probably not a real thing, but which she was holding on to anyway. The summer was the best she had ever had. She was aware of this with a quality of attention that was almost careful. The way she was careful with anything, good, having learned early that good things were not always reliable. But the summer accumulated day by day into something that bore up under examination, the work that mattered, the land that was beautiful in the specific way of country. You were learning rather than simply passing through the company of a man who was still in his own assessment, working at how to be worth it, and was by that effort worth it entirely. She had a horse. Colt had provided one, a bay mare named Juniper, even-tempered and sensible, which was the assessment of a man who had thought carefully about what a woman with a heart condition needed in a horse. She did not ride fast or far, but she rode, and she was learning the land from horseback, the way you could not learn it from a wagon. The draws and the rises, the places where the creek bent, the particular ridge line that turned the light gold in the late afternoon. She was learning the land the way it wanted to be learned. Her heart was, she would not say better, because the condition was not something that became better, but it was stable, which for her heart was something close to thriving. The medicine, the measured effort, the life that fit the actual shape of her body, rather than demanding that she stretch to fit the shape of a life designed for people with different limitations. All of this created conditions in which she was simply remarkably well. She told Colt this on the July evening when they were sitting on the east porch after supper, watching the sky go from gold to the first blue of evening. He was sitting next to her on the bench that had appeared on the porch sometime in May, without either of them having specifically arranged it close enough that she could feel the warmth of him far enough that she was aware of the deliberateness of his care. "My heart is stable," she said, "more stable than it's been in years. My doctor in Abilene, I saw him last Thursday. He's pleased." He looked at her with the expression she had come to know best on him, the one that was unguarded and direct and did not manage anything. "Good," he said, 2 syllables with everything in them. He said, "I can probably expect to continue managing it well for the foreseeable future," she added, because she wanted him to know this, the foreseeable future was a thing she was authorized to expect. He said, "Living conditions and low stress are significant factors." "Low stress," he said with a very slight undertone she recognized as amusement. "Relatively," she amended, "compared to what I was doing before." He said nothing for a moment, looking at the sky. Then, "You said something to me in the apothecary. In October. You said you'd had more life in you than your body was supposed to permit, that you'd had to be deliberate about it." "I remember. Think about that." He turned to look at her. "A great deal." "Why?" "Because it's the most useful thing anyone's ever said to me about how to live. And because," he paused, "because I have not been deliberate about any of it. I've been reactive, managing problems as they arose, not deciding things, not choosing." He was looking at her with the focused, unhurried quality that had been, she thought, the first thing she really saw in him, in the doorway of the apothecary, a man who assessed before he committed. "I want to choose." Her heart was doing something that was not the irregular stutter of its usual failure mode, but something else entirely, a fullness, a warm weight in her chest that she knew by now was not a symptom. "What are you choosing?" she said quietly. He reached over and took her hand, which he did sometimes the simple, unceremonious gesture of a man who had decided this was a thing he was allowed to do. "I'm choosing this," he said. "You, Iron Ridge, with you in it. Whatever the future looks like with you as part of it." He paused. "If you're choosing it too." "I've been choosing it," she said, for months. His exhale was the sound of something released. He squeezed her hand and she turned it and held on the way she always did. And they sat on the bench in the evening light and watched the stars come out over the ridge country slow. And then all at once, the way things happened when you stopped hurrying them. "I love you," she said. She had been waiting for the right moment, and there it was, simple and obvious the way right moments generally were. "I should have said it before." "No," he said. "You said it when you meant to." She looked at him. "That's one of the things he said about you." The autumn brought its own business. The great cattle drive of 1890, Iron Ridge's annual reckoning with the market, was 2 weeks of organized, controlled chaos that she observed from the periphery with the respectful attention of someone watching a thing done well. Colt was in his element in a way that was different from his ordinary authority, more physical, more immediate. The 100 small decisions that came with moving several thousand cattle across 300 miles, handled with the instinctive competence of a man who had been doing this since before he was old enough to do it. She tended to the men who came back from the trail with the expected assortment of saddle, sores, rope burns, one sprained wrist from a horse that had strong opinions about its direction, and a man named Pearson who had eaten something on the trail that his stomach was expressing significant objections to. She managed it all, and Colt came home from the drive at the end of the second week with trail dust on everything, and the satisfied expression of a man who has done the central thing of his work well. And he stopped in the doorway of the kitchen and looked at her, standing at the table making notes in a ledger, and he said simply, "Hello." "Hello," she said. "There's coffee. Rosa left supper in the oven." "Is there anything that needs urgent attention?" "Pearson needs a second day of rest and plain food. Everything else can wait until tomorrow." He came in and poured coffee and sat down, and she went on making her notes, and the kitchen was warm and quiet, with the sounds of autumn outside it, and this was, she thought, the plainest version of happiness she had ever experienced. The kitchen, the coffee, the notes, and him across the table. "Elara." His voice had the particular quality that it had when he was going to say something he had decided on. She looked up. "I want to marry you," he said. No preamble, no careful construction. Directness, which was, she had decided, his love language, the most undefended thing he knew how to offer. "If you're willing, when you're ready, I'm not putting a timeline on it." She looked at him across the kitchen table. Colt Maddox, who had knocked before entering rooms that belonged to him, who had left boots in the supply room without saying so, who had sat with her at this table through a document, in a disclosure, in a fire, in a winter, in a spring, in a summer, in an autumn, and who was now looking at her with the unmanaged face of a man who was asking for something real. "I'm willing," she said, "and I'm ready." "You're sure?" "I've been sure since July," she said. "I was waiting for you to ask." Something happened to his face that she had seen very rarely, a kind of unguarded joy, which on those particular features was different enough from his usual expression that it was almost startling. He reached across the table and she met him halfway, her hand in his the way they always did, as though they had agreed somewhere in the 7 months to always meet in the middle. They were married in December, at the beginning of the month before the real cold settled in the Dust Haven church where Elara's grandmother had been buried, because that was the right place for it, a thread of continuity from what she had come from to what she was becoming. It was a small wedding. Rosa was there, and Travis, an old beau, who cried with complete unself-consciousness and was not the least embarrassed about it. Hector was there, fully recovered, his color good, his lungs clear. Several other ranch hands who had clean shirts and the kind of expressions that people make when something good is happening and they are glad to be near it. The ceremony was brief and honest, which suited them both. The ring he put on her finger was simple, a band of Texas gold that had been his grandmother's, which Rosa had mentioned, which he had had resized without being asked because he was a man who noticed things. Afterward, there was a meal at Iron Ridge that Rosa had been planning for longer than Elara knew, and there was music from somewhere, a fiddle, a guitar, the particular Texas music that had no obligation to be anything other than joyful, and there were people she had come to know and people she was still learning, and the long table in the main room of the Iron Ridge house was full. She sat beside her husband. He said very little during the meal, which was his way in crowds, but he was present fully, deliberately present in the way she had come to know meant the most to him. His hand found hers under the table at some point and stayed there, and she held on, because that was what they did. Travis gave a speech that was very sincere and moderately coherent and brought the house down anyway, because sincerity is its own eloquence. Rosa said nothing, which was also very Rosa, but she looked at Elara with an expression that said everything the speech had not. Old Bo cried again. That winter was different from the winter before, but true. Not in any of its externals, the same cold off the ridge, the same frost on the corrals in the morning, the same cattle standing patient in the wind. But inside the Iron Ridge house, there was a particular quality of warmth that had not been there before, the specific warmth of a house with two people in it who were both by deliberate choice entirely there. She had her work. He had his. They were distinct, which suited them both. She had never wanted to be absorbed, and he had never wanted to absorb, and between them there was a respect for the other's independence that was itself a form of intimacy. But there were evenings. There were the long evenings of a Texas winter when the dark came early and the fireplace was the center of everything. And they had learned each other in the way that could only be learned in that specific setting, the quiet, the warmth, the absence of performance. He was still working at it, the way he had said he would be working at the openness, at the saying of things without managing them first, at the trust that saying something real would not cost him what he could not afford to lose. She watched him work at it and found it one of the most beautiful things she had ever seen, a man choosing deliberately to be more than what had been made of him. She was still careful with herself, still took her medicine, still monitored the signs she had been monitoring since she was old enough to know what they meant, still brought the same deliberate attention to the management of the body she had been given. But she did not manage herself alone anymore. He knew the signs too had asked her to teach. Him had learned attentively was the person most likely to notice before she did when the signs were not right. Your lips, he had said one evening in January in the quiet and direct way that meant he had noticed something. She had taken her medicine. She had rested. She had been fine by morning. He did not make a spectacle of it. He did not panic or catastrophize or make her feel like a fragile thing that required constant management. He simply noticed and said so, and was steady, the same quality she had seen in the October doorway, the same quality that had been her first real sense of him. He was a man who could be counted on to be there, in the doorway, at the table, at the fence in the morning with the coffee getting cold because he was watching the light change. She told him this once the January evening after the medicine, and the rest when she was sitting by the fire with his arm around her, and the wind outside doing its business against the walls. You are, she said, the most reliable person I've ever known. He was quiet for a moment. That's a low bar, he said. No, she said, it's not. Reliable is not simple. Reliable is a choice made every day in small things and large ones, when it's easy and when it isn't. She leaned her head back against his shoulder. It's the hardest kind of person to be. He was quiet in the way that meant he was taking something in rather than past it. Then, you are what I didn't know to look for, he said. I was looking for the wrong thing for a long time. What were you looking for? Something I could manage, he said simply. Someone that fit into the life I had already built. Someone who didn't complicate things. A pause. You complicate everything. I know, she said. It's the best thing he said that's ever happened to me. Epilogue, spring 1891. The morning Elara Quinn Maddox realized she was going to be a mother, she was standing in the East Room. Her room, their room, looking at the view that was 30 miles in two directions. The new grass was coming in the same color it had been the year before, that narrow window green of April on the ridge country. She stood very still for a moment, her hand at her side, her heart beating its complicated, uneven, borrowed time beat in her chest. She was going to need to see her physician in Abilene. There were considerations for a woman with her condition that required attention and planning, and the specific expertise of someone who could manage what she would need to manage. She knew this. She would address it with the same clear-eyed attention she brought to every practical challenge. But first, for just a moment, she let herself stand in the East Room with the April light coming through both windows 30 miles in two directions, and feel the full weight of what her life had become, this country, this house, this work, this man asleep in the next room, who knocked before he entered and noticed when her lips turned blue and had left boots in the supply room before she understood what that meant. She had been told when she was young that her heart condition would limit her. She had been told gently by people who meant well that she should expect a smaller life, a careful life, a life measured in what she ought not to attempt. She had taken their caution and she had done with it what she did with everything she had examined. It honestly kept the parts that were true and set aside the parts that were wrong. The parts that were wrong were the limits people imagined for her that she had never actually reached. The life they had envisioned there was not a life she had been given or a life she had chosen. She had chosen this one every deliberate Saturday, every clear-eyed conversation, every moment she had said the true thing when the managed version would have been easier. She went to wake Colt. He was already half awake. He slept lightly, always had the trained attention of a man who was responsible for a great deal and had internalized that responsibility into his rest. When she sat on the edge of the bed, he opened his eyes and looked at her with the particular unhurried attention of early morning before any management of expression was necessary. He looked at her face and was very still for a moment. Then quietly, "Tell me." She told him. He sat up. He was silent for a moment with the quality of silence that she recognized as him taking something in genuinely in all the way. Then he reached for her hand and she gave it to him and he held it in both of his. "Are you afraid?" he said. "Yes," she said, "and glad, both at once." "Yes," he said, "both at once." He looked at their joined hands. "We'll do it carefully." "We'll do it deliberately," she said. He looked up at her. In the April morning light with the 30-mile view, outside the windows in the green of new grass on the ridge, his face was the unguarded, clear-eyed face of a man who had chosen it every day, in small things and large ones when it was easy and when it wasn't. "Together," he said. "Together," she agreed. Outside Iron Ridge was waking up the sounds of the corrals, the smoke from the bunkhouse stove, the distant movement of cattle on the spring grass. 340 people going about the ordinary business of an extraordinary place. And inside the house in the east room with its two-sided view, a woman with an imperfect heart and a deliberate life held onto the hand of the man she had chosen, and her heart complicated borrowed time more alive than it was supposed to be beat on.